Welcome back. Now, if we go to our load menu and we click plus for new game, we have this nice enter name widget, and we can enter in a name and click new slot. And we switch to the next slot, which is great, but we're not showing that player name. In this video, we're going to bind that player name to a property on our view model. And to do that, we have to go back to C++ and go into our load slot view model here and change player name in a very specific way. We have to make this a field notify. That's right, a field notify is how we can make this something that can be linked with the widget using this view model. So this is where the magic of view models is really going to come into play. Now, I'm going to have my player name and the rest of my field notifies beneath the load slot name and slot index. And I'll just go ahead and put a comment here that says field notifies. And here's how I can make player name a field notify. First of all, I'm going to make it edit anywhere. I'm going to make it blueprint read write. We're going to give it full access here. And then we're going to set this variable to be a field notify with field notify. Now, if we give it field notify, we have to specify whether we want to give it a setter and a getter. So if we give it a setter and a getter, then we must now define setter and getter for this. And they have to be specific setters and getters. We have to have void set player name. It has to be set with that variable name. So set player name. And it has to take in an F string called in player name. The input parameter name isn't important, but the function name is. And we'll see in just a second why this is important. And we also need a getter, F string, get player name, const, should be const, return player name. Now, the setter I did not define right here on the same line, and that's because I'm going to do something a little more involved than just setting it, not much more involved. We're going to use a macro. Now, this macro is something built into the MVVM system in Unreal, and it's UE MVVM, take note of the underscores, set property value. Now, we give it the name, player name, and we give it the value in player name. Now, we do get red squiggles, but if we compile successfully. Now, that's not typically something you see with Writer. You see it with VS all the time. Visual Studio gets those false red squiggles all the time, but Writer, it's a little more rare. But again, this is in beta at the time, so it's possible by the time you're watching this, it might be fixed. But this macro is how we can make a broadcast to our widgets. And if we go to it, we'll see what it does. It's calling set property value. And set property value is making a broadcast. Broadcast field value change. You get the idea. These are delegates. This is just a system in place making things supposedly easier. I don't know. You be the judge. Is this easier than just creating a widget controller like we've done earlier in the course? I'm not so sure. But hey, it's a system for you, right? And this is going to broadcast to widgets that have bound to this variable. So that's the next step, is to bind to the player name so that whenever we make this broadcast with this macro, then we'll see that change reflected in the widget. So our next step is to make that binding link. So opening up we have our load screen game mode. I don't really need that open. I'm going to close that, and I'm going to go to Blueprints UI, load menu, and find my load screen taken, because this player name right here is what I want to bind. I'm going to check is variable first, and I'm going to set it, and it's called text player name, and I'm going to bind this. How do we bind it? Well, there's a couple of ways. One way is to find it right here, find what we want to bind, and choose bind right here. And we can bind to our load slot view model and choose. Now, this way is still a little bit buggy, as again, this is in the beta, so you got to bear with it. But this way is a little bit buggy, but it works consistently if we go down here to View Bindings and click plus Add Widget. And here's what we need to do. We need to choose, first of all, from the drop-down here, which widget we want to bind. We want to bind our text player name, right? So let's find it, text player name. Here it is. We select that, and right here, we take that text player name widget and choose which of its properties we want to bind. We want to bind its text, right? We need to select that text, and here it is. It's pink because it's an F text. We select that. Okay, now this arrow in the middle is what determines which direction information can flow. Do we want it to flow to our widget into the text value from somewhere else, say a view model? Well, yes, then we want that arrow pointing to the left. But if we want to change it here somehow at runtime, and when it changes, make that change apparent to whatever's here on the right, say a view model, then we would want to change this to go the other way, one way to view model. And then, of course, it can be two-way. It could be set up so that information can flow back and forth, but for this, we just want the view model to send the information to the text. So we're going to have it pointed to the left, one way to widget, and we're going to select from the dropdown our view model. And the view model is going to be our load slot view model, the BP version. Now, here's the thing though, on our view model, we only have an F string, and this is an F text. We can't bind an F string to an F text, but what we can do is click the dropdown for these conversion functions. In fact, we don't have to click the dropdown. We can just click on conversion functions. And we want to convert from a string to a text. So we use toText in parentheses string, select that, and now that we're using a conversion function, the string that we can give this can come from our view model, BP load slot view model, player name. We can select that. And now we've successfully bound the player name on the view model through a conversion function to the text in our player name widget. It's kind of a rabbit hole, right? But that's what this binding means. And you can also uncheck it to turn off that binding. But what this means now, because the information flows one way to the widget, it takes the player name as an F string from the load slot view model, converts it to text from string, and sets the text on the player name text block. Okay, I think you get the point. So now that we've done that, and also because we're broadcasting a value whenever we call set player name, when we set the player name, we should see that change reflected in the widget. We just have to set the player name. We have to call this. And when are we going to call it? Well, we can go to our load screen view model. Whenever we click the new slot button, as we save the slot data and we call initialize slot, we can call that function on the load slot view model called set player name. And that's going to broadcast this to that bound variable. So as soon as we know this player name, it's that entered name, we're going to take that load slot with load slots of slot, and we're going to call set player name. Instead of setting the player name variable directly, we have to call the setter, so we make that broadcast. Like this. So now we no longer need to set the player name directly. We're going to call that setter that makes the broadcast. So now that we're doing that, and we have our binding here in the blueprint, we can compile and launch. So we're going to save and close. And now when we click the new slot button, not only are we saving to disk, we're also setting the load slot that our load screen view model has. We're calling set player name on it, which is going to make a broadcast to our widget, which has bound a variable to it. Let's see how this works. Okay, so here's our load slot. Here's our player name. We know that we've bound the text on player name to the player name, and we're making a broadcast when we click a button. Let's click that button, not in this level. We have to go to Maps, load menu and open this. So we can click on any one of these and enter a name. I'm going to enter Steven and click new slot. And look at that. It says Steven because of that binding. The binding magic is working. Okay, so this has nothing to do with saving to disk. This just has to do with the fact that we called that macro to broadcast over here in our MVVM load slot. We called UE MVVM set property value. This was called in response to our load screen view model, calling set player name there. So this happened before we even saved data to disk. So we could have tested that before even creating a save game object. That's okay though, because we're also saving to disk, which is good. And whenever we save to disk, we need our slots to know. We need them to have a status. They need to know whether or not they've got valid data. So at the beginning, when we first go to the level, we're showing the correct thing in the widget. So we need a status. And we're going to implement that in the next video. I'll see you soon.